The ceramic tiles felt unnaturally cold against my palms as I sat on the pool deck. I checked my watch at exactly 4:14 p.m. We were positioned at 33.7426 degrees north and 118.2721 degrees west. Somewhere below deck, in cabin 7242, my sister Faith was screaming my name. I could almost hear the vibration of her fist against the hollow wood of the bathroom door. My name is Alex. I am 24 years old. I operate as a lead systems architect for high-density logistics firms. My job is to identify single points of failure in complex networks. I find the one small gear that, when removed, halts the entire machine. Right now, the machine was Faith. She had spent the last 48 hours performing a masterclass in emotional manipulation. It started with the golf cart incident on Catalina Island. The impact velocity was low, but the theatrical output was industrial grade. Faith claimed she could not walk. She demanded crutches and a wheelchair. She forced cruise staff to treat her like a wounded sovereign. Then came the market in Ensenada. I watched her take one sip of a margarita. Suddenly, the neurological pain vanished, and she walked 3 miles without a limp. The moment we returned to the boat, the symptoms miraculously returned. She demanded I carry her bags. She called me a selfish failure when I hesitated. When we reached the cabin, she tried to block my path to the restroom. She claimed her injury gave her priority access to every shared resource. I did not argue or raise my voice. I simply entered the room first and locked the door. I looked at the 3 rolls of high-ply toilet paper sitting in the cabinet. In logistics, this is called resource redirection. I stuffed every roll into my waterproof gear bag. I walked out while she was still mid-insult. I am now sitting by the pool, watching the horizon line. My phone has vibrated 17 times in the last 6 minutes. The messages are a frantic mix of profanity and desperation. Do you remember the exact moment you realized a family member was using their weakness as a weapon against you? I am looking at the low paper alert in my mind and realizing the bathroom is now a closed system with no exit strategy. The internal architecture of my family functions on a hierarchy of perceived fragility. At the top sits Faith. She is 14 years old and has mastered the art of the tactical crisis. My parents, David and Elena, operate as her primary enablers. They view her tantrums as personality and her manipulation as a survival skill. I have spent 24 years observing this cycle from the periphery. In my professional world, I design fail-safes for global supply chains. In my personal life, I have been the invisible infrastructure supporting their chaos. My role was defined early. I was the reliable one, the one who didn't need the extra attention. This meant my needs were always secondary to Faith's latest emergency. Last year, she demanded a $4,200 wardrobe for a school dance she didn't even attend. My parents paid for it while asking me to defer my graduate school savings to cover a family emergency. That emergency turned out to be a luxury spa weekend to help Faith manage her stress. They do not see the cost of their choices. They only see the immediate silence they buy when they give in to her. This cruise was supposed to be a neutral ground. Instead, it became a theater for Faith's most ambitious performance yet. The golf cart flip was a genuine accident. My cousin's medical evacuation was a legitimate crisis, but Faith saw an opportunity to pivot the spotlight back to herself. She watched the helicopter lift our cousin away and immediately began clutching her knee. The medical staff on board cleared her of any structural damage. They found nothing but minor abrasions and soft tissue bruising. Yet, she demanded the crutches. She demanded the wheelchair. My parents fell into their usual roles instantly. They spent $145 on comfort supplies from the gift shop. They apologized to her for the weather. They apologized for the movement of the boat. I stood by and calculated the man-hours wasted on her fabrication. My father is an executive who prides himself on efficiency. My mother is a teacher who speaks often of accountability. Yet, when it comes to the youngest child, their logic centers simply shut down. They have spent 14 years teaching her that a loud enough scream can rewrite reality. I decided it was time to introduce a variable they could not ignore. In my line of work, I manage a digital inventory worth millions. My professional toolkit consists of administrative access and systemic oversight. People see the final product, but they never see the protocols that keep it running. My family views me as a walking technical support desk. They take my labor for granted because I have made it look effortless for a decade. I am the one who manages the family cloud storage. I am the one who maintains the home security network. I even handle the automated billing for my parents' shared utilities. Before we left for this cruise, I spent 48 hours optimizing our digital footprint. I set up the group travel insurance and the international roaming packages. I am the primary account holder for the family's high-speed data plan. I pay exactly $214.50 every month to ensure everyone has unlimited access. Faith treats this connection like oxygen. She uses it to broadcast her manufactured dramas to her friends in real time. She does not understand that her digital life exists on a server I control. The tools I carry are not physical weapons. They are administrative privileges. I have the credentials to revoke device authorization with a single command. I also carry a specific set of physical gear in my Pelican 1510 protector case. This includes a high-capacity power bank and a portable network bridge. While Faith was busy rehearsing her limp, I was verifying the ship's Wi-Fi dead zones. I knew exactly which decks had the weakest signals. I knew which lounges required a secondary login that only I had configured. I am the invisible hand that keeps their world synchronized. When Faith's phone dies, I am the one with the lightning cable. When my father loses his boarding pass, I have the digital backup ready. They have lived in a world of frictionless convenience, provided by my constant vigilance. They assume these services are a natural right, rather than a professional courtesy. They believe they can berate the architect while still living comfortably in the house he built. I looked at the bag of toilet paper and realized I was done being the infrastructure. The arsenal was ready, and the first outage had already begun. The breaking point occurred at 2:12 p.m. on the bus ride back from the Ensenada vendor market. Faith was sitting in the front row. She had her crutches propped up like a barricade across the aisle. She was berating a local driver because the air conditioning was not reaching her seat. My stepmother was frantically fanning her with a tourist map. My father was offering her a cold bottle of water. Faith knocked the bottle away and called him incompetent. She then turned her venom toward me. She demanded I hand over my sunglasses because the glare was triggering her migraine. I looked at her and said no. The reaction was instantaneous and visceral. She began a high-pitched monologue about my lack of empathy. She reminded the entire bus that she was a victim of a traumatic accident. She used words like abuse and neglect because I wouldn't surrender a piece of personal property. I watched her closely. Her pupils were normal. Her heart rate, visible in the pulse of her neck, was steady. This was not a medical crisis. This was a hostile takeover of the family dynamic. I decided then to begin the administrative withdrawal. I opened the service provider app on my phone. My movements were precise and deliberate. I accessed the device management portal of our shared data plan. I selected Faith's iPhone 15 Pro. I hit the toggle for suspend service. I did the same for her iPad. I then moved to the shared cloud account. I changed the primary recovery email to a private encrypted address. I revoked her access to the family media folder. In the world of systems architecture, this is called isolating a compromised node. I sat in silence as the bus pulled up to the pier. I could see the moment the no service icon appeared on her screen. She began shaking the device as if physical force could restore the signal. She didn't know that I had also placed a remote lock on her roaming privileges. The transition was seamless. To my parents, it looked like a technical glitch. To me, it was the first step in a total system shutdown. I was no longer providing the bandwidth for her toxicity. I felt a strange sense of clinical satisfaction. The infrastructure was being dismantled, one connection at a time. The atmosphere in cabin 7242 shifted from tension to a full-scale tactical emergency within 20 minutes. I stood on the balcony and watched the wake of the ship. Through the heavy glass door, I could hear the muffled sounds of the first wave of panic. Faith had realized her digital tether was severed. To a 14-year-old whose social currency depends on constant connectivity, this was a total blackout. She was not just hurt anymore. She was invisible. She began a frantic interrogation of our parents, demanding they fix the broken satellite signal. My father spent 15 minutes toggling the settings on his own device. He did not understand why his phone worked perfectly, while hers remained a brick. He called me into the room at 4:45 p.m. He used his executive voice, the one he uses when a deadline is missed. He told me to stop playing games and fix her connection. I remained emotionally detached. I explained in technical terms that the roaming handshake between the ship's tower and our provider must have glitched. I told him I would look into it, eventually. Faith did not like the word eventually. She threw a decorative pillow at my head and screamed that I was ruining her life on purpose. She then pivoted back to her physical performance. She collapsed onto the sofa and claimed the stress was making her leg throb with agony. My stepmother immediately began calling the ship's medical bay. She was in tears, convinced Faith was heading into a relapse. I watched Faith sneak a glance at her dead phone while she was supposed to be in a state of collapse. It was a calculated check of the system. The escalation moved from the digital to the physical when I headed for the bathroom. That was when she blocked the door, as I previously noted. She used her crutches as a physical gate. She spat out insults that would have made a sailor blush. My parents stood behind her, silent, essentially sanctioning her behavior through their inaction. They didn't tell her to stop. They just looked at me with exhaustion, hoping I would yield so they could have peace. I realized then that they weren't just enablers. They were hostages who had fallen in love with their captor. I stepped into the bathroom, closed the door, and prepared the final resource redirection. The logic of a trap relies entirely on the target's predictable behavior. Faith is a creature of habit and high-frequency demands. I knew that within 60 minutes of my departure from the cabin, she would enter the bathroom to refresh her war paint for dinner. At exactly 5:15 p.m., I opened my laptop in the quiet lounge on Deck 11. I accessed the cruise ship's internal portal using the administrative bypass I had mapped out during the first day of the voyage. I needed undeniable receipts. I needed a log of her physical activity that even my parents could not dispute. I navigated to the ship's closed-circuit television metadata. As a logistics architect, I have a deep understanding of facial recognition timestamps. I pulled the logs for the Ensenada Marketplace exit gate from 2 p.m. The data did not lie. Frame-by-frame analysis showed Faith walking at a steady pace of 3.4 miles per hour. Her gait was symmetrical. Her weight distribution on both legs was equal to within a 2% margin of error. There were no crutches. There was no wheelchair. In one specific clip, she is seen jogging roughly 12 feet to catch a street performer's hat. I downloaded the high-definition files to a secure local drive. I then cross-referenced these timestamps with the frantic texts she had sent my father during that same window. At 2:05 p.m., she had messaged him saying, "I'm in so much pain I can't breathe. Why did you leave me at the taco stand?" The metadata showed her laughing and eating a churro at that exact second. This was the pattern of deceit log. I formatted the data into a clean, professional PDF. I added a header that looked like a technical audit report. I sat back and watched the Find My Coordinates for her device. She was currently stationary in the cabin. I knew the toilet paper situation would be reaching its critical mass. The ship's plumbing is a vacuum-sealed system. You cannot simply use paper towels or napkins without risking a catastrophic backup. Faith was now trapped in a physical environment where she had no resources and no digital voice. Have you ever noticed how the loudest people become the most desperate when they realize their audience is no longer listening? I hit the Print to PDF button on the final report. The receipts were ready for delivery. At 6:30 p.m., the family dinner bell rang in the form of a synchronized calendar invite. I arrived at the Pacific Pearl dining room exactly 4 minutes late. My father and stepmother were already seated at the circular table. Faith was missing. The atmosphere was thick with a manufactured gloom that usually precedes a staged intervention. My father didn't look up from his menu. My stepmother was twisting her napkin into a tight rope. They were preparing to negotiate with me. In their minds, I was the stubborn obstacle preventing the family from achieving its baseline of dysfunctional quiet. My father spoke first without making eye contact. He used his mediation voice. He told me that we were all on edge because of the accident. He said that Faith was currently trapped in the cabin because she was feeling overwhelmed and physically depleted. He suggested that if I just apologized for my cold behavior and restored her phone service, we could have a nice final night. He offered a compromise where I would pay for her room service tonight as a gesture of goodwill. It was a classic administrative bribe. They wanted me to fund the fiction of her suffering. I sat down and ordered a sparkling water. I told them I was prepared to discuss the situation, but only with full transparency. Right on cue, the false truce moved into phase 2. Faith appeared at the entrance of the dining room. She was leaning heavily on my stepmother's arm, her crutches clicking rhythmically against the marble floor. She looked pale and exhausted. It was a convincing performance for anyone who hadn't seen the 3.4-mile-per-hour gait logs I had sitting on my tablet. She sat down and began to weep silently, refusing to look at me. They all leaned in, expecting me to crack. They thought the public setting and the sight of her pain would force my compliance. My stepmother reached across the table and took my hand. She told me that family means supporting each other through the hard times. She said that Faith's behavior was just a reaction to her trauma. I looked at Faith and asked her how the churro tasted at the Ensenada market. The weeping stopped instantly. Her eyes narrowed, and for a split second, the mask of the victim slipped to reveal the face of a cornered predator. The dining room was filled with the soft clink of silverware and the low hum of 500 private conversations. It was the perfect acoustic environment for a systematic dismantling. Faith's eyes darted toward our parents, checking for their support. She opened her mouth to begin a rebuttal, likely involving a fresh set of accusations. I did not give her the opening. I placed my tablet on the white linen tablecloth and turned it toward my father. I opened the Pattern of Deceit audit report. I hit play on the first video file. The high-definition screen showed Faith at the Ensenada gate. There was no crutch. There was no limp. The timestamp in the corner read 2:08 p.m. I then swiped to the side-by-side comparison of the text message she sent my father at that exact minute. The text said she was paralyzed with leg spasms. On the video, she was performing a celebratory hop after winning a stuffed animal at a ring toss booth. My stepmother gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. My father's face transitioned from executive sternness to a deep, flushed shade of crimson. I did not raise my voice. I spoke with the clinical tone of a board member presenting a quarterly loss. I explained the physics of her gait. I pointed out the lack of inflammation or muscle guarding in her movements. Faith tried to snatch the tablet, but I moved it just out of her reach. She began to scream that I had hacked her and that the video was fake. Do you find it fascinating how people will deny the very reality captured by a lens when it threatens their perceived power? The people at the neighboring tables turned to stare. The royal treatment was dissolving in the light of public scrutiny. I then addressed the bathroom incident. I informed my parents that I had removed the toilet paper because I refused to facilitate a hostage situation in my own living quarters. I told them that Faith had spent 40 minutes calling my phone while sitting on the toilet, not because she was in pain, but because she had finally run out of people to manipulate. I looked at my father and told him the exact cost of the roaming data I had suspended: $84.22 per day for a service she used to lie to him. The receipts were undeniable. The systemic failure of their parenting was now a matter of public record. The fallout was not an explosion, but a rapid structural disintegration. My father sat in a heavy silence that carried the weight of 14 years of realization. He looked at the tablet, then at the daughter who had been his greatest investment and his greatest deception. The executive in him finally overrode the enabler. He reached out and took Faith's phone from the table. He did not ask for it. He simply removed it from her possession. He informed her that the accident was officially over. He told her she would be walking back to the cabin without assistance. The immediate ruin of her reputation within the family unit was total. My stepmother, usually the first responder to Faith's tears, did not reach out to comfort her. She looked at the video of the churro stand and then at the crutches leaning against the expensive table. She realized she had been turned into a pack animal for a girl who was jogging 12 feet for a hat. The administrative consequences followed quickly. My father canceled the comfort package and the room service privileges. He informed Faith that the $4,200 wardrobe back home would be sold to reimburse the family emergency fund she had drained. Faith attempted one final desperate play. She stood up and tried to storm away, but her habit of faking the limp caught her off balance. She stumbled, looked for a hand to catch her, and found none. She was forced to walk out of the dining room on her own 2 feet, under the watchful eyes of the patrons she had spent the week disturbing. The systemic collapse extended to her digital world as well. Since I maintained control of the primary accounts, her no-service status became permanent for the remainder of the voyage. By the time we docked back in Los Angeles, the power dynamic had inverted. Faith was no longer the center of the family solar system. She was a passenger under strict observation. She had lost her social media access, her financial leverage, and her ability to use fragility as a currency. My parents were no longer negotiating. They were issuing directives. The infrastructure of her manipulation had been mapped, audited, and decommissioned. The machine had stopped. I stood on the pier in San Pedro and watched the logistics of the offloading process. The massive cranes moved containers with a precision that I found deeply soothing. Behind me, Faith was carrying her own suitcases for the first time in years. There were no crutches. There was no wheelchair. There was only the quiet, rhythmic sound of a family moving in a straight line. My father stopped next to me and looked at the horizon. He did not apologize in words, but he handed me a coffee and stood in silence for exactly 3 minutes. That was the administrative equivalent of a white flag. The peace I gained was not born from cruelty, but from the restoration of equilibrium. In systems architecture, we call this a hard reset. By removing the resources that fueled the chaos, I forced the network to return to its baseline. Faith was not happy, but she was functional. She was learning that the world does not provide high-ply comfort to those who use their needs as a weapon. My parents were finally seeing the difference between supporting a child and subsidizing a performer. As I watched them load the car, I felt a profound sense of detachment. I had provided the audit, executed the severance, and managed the collapse. The youngest sibling energy had met the lead architect protocol, and the protocol had won. I opened my phone and restored my father's administrative access to the family cloud, but Faith's device remained a ghost in the system. Some connections are best left severed. How many single points of failure are currently sitting at your dinner table, waiting for the right moment to pull the lever? I'm going home to a quiet apartment where the inventory is accounted for and the bathroom is fully stocked.